Welcome back to the Solutions Podcast, everyone. I'm Michael Rosmer.
And I'm Jim Pastor-Matzes.
And today we're going to talk about chips planted in your brain. This is, maybe a little bit scary sounding. That's why we're going to talk about it. It's also potentially really important.
And not something that Google would allow us to, do ads on, right?
Perhaps. I don't know. I haven't looked at their ad policy.
This meme right here.
Yeah.
That's going around with Bill Gates and Elon Musk,
right?
Yeah. I hope we can have our video guy actually pop it up here.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's like, look, Bill Gates talks about doing something similar. You don't want that. There's something shady there. Elon comes around and wants to do that. Perfect. Sign me up.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said there that people just don't trust these two people the same, obviously.
Obviously.
But this is such a huge step. Like, dude, they literally they drill your brain and they attach a chip on it.
Yes.
It's like, how can you trust this person over this person? Now.
Exactly. Before we get into that, though, if you haven't already, click the subscribe button and the notification bell.
Yes.
And smash the like button, destroy the like button. Because we're going to have a great episode. We're going to talk about the future of technology.
Please leave your comments below. Let us know. Give us feedback, guys. We're still working a lot on the camera and everything there. We're going to work on bringing on multiple angles as well. This is something that we're actively working on. But we would like to welcome as much feedback as possible, especially early on. If there's anything at all that we can do, now would be the time to do it. So please comment below, let us know, give us your feedback. And without further ado, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So we're talking, for those of you who don't know, about Neuralink. So do you want to explain to us what Neuralink is?
So Neuralink is is it fair to say startup company at this point, right?
Yeah,
it's
I
a
would
startup.
say so, yeah.
It's one of
Pre-revenue.
Elon Musk's startups. So the mission of Neuralink is, initially to help disabled people or paraplegics, people that have problems with their brain. So basically their brain not functioning properly and therefore, for example, not having proper limb functionality, right?
I don't think it's limb functionality, but yeah.
Isn't it? I thought in the last interview with Joe Rogan, Elon actually said that it would help stimulate the brain. For example, the people that can't use their legs to actually.
Yes. Sorry. You said limb. I thought you said lymph.
Oh no.
Like,
no.
Lymph nodes? No, I don't think so. Yeah.
No, limb. Yeah. So, I'm Greek, so sometimes, my girlfriend tells me all the time how sometimes some words that I say just, it's like, what do you say there? Yeah. So I'm trying to improve. Yeah. But it's pretty amazing, very, very amazing for those reasons. And the other reason why Elon Musk says he wants us people to catch up with AI, and Neuralink is going to be basically, that thing that's going to help us catch up and not fall far behind. Yeah. So
maybe let's set the stage just by framing why this is important. So first of all, technology-wise, it's the idea of something called a neural lace, which essentially is a whole bunch of wires that connect directly into your brain. So they cut a hole in your skull, and they have a special robot go and literally run these wires into different parts of your brain. They're basically probes that can receive electrical signals. And
so the surgery is actually done by a robot, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And then they put this little computer chip basically in there and cover over the spot where the.
Do you remember? Is it a specific part of the brain, or is it depending on what you want to achieve?
Well, right now they're in very early experimental phases. Like, the truth is, this is technology that will mature over 20, 30 years, right? Like, this is something that we don't know that much about. So it's really cool because up until this point in time, all of our knowledge about the brain basically has been by scanning through the skull.
Yeah.
Right? So you just think about this. It's like trying to understand what's going on in a house by having sensors outside the wall. That's basically what we've been doing.
That's true. No, you're right.
And finally, we're going to be able to connect right onto the neuron level and identify exactly what's going on in real time, which is super interesting.
To say the least. I mean, we know nothing. I mean, is it fair to say we know nothing about the brain?
Probably not nothing, but
very little.
little. Yeah, yeah.
Very, very little.
And even like, there's a really cool TED Talk, we'll give a plug to this, I think it's called What We Learned from Doing 83,000 Brain Scans.
Okay.
And the guy who's giving the talk is talking about using MRIs to scan people's brains for the purposes of kind of like psychology, et cetera.
Okay.
And he was commenting on how it's very interesting that psychologists are the only type of doctor who does not examine the organ they claim to treat, which is an interesting observation, right?
Right.
And so already, just like from the like psychologist, psychiatrist perspective, there has been a lack of like empirical data on the organ, even up to very recently. And so, you know, the amount of ground that we can cover over the next 20, 30 years in terms of learning is profound, right? Just incredible.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty interesting. It's also kind of terrifying, right? Because who likes the idea of having a computer chip planted in their brain? Probably not many people, right?
Well, I
would you do it?
I wouldn't be the first or one of the first people to do it, that's for sure. That's for certain. However, I don't know if people are very familiar also with its full range of utilities as well. So besides those things that are very general, for example, catching up with AI, what does that mean, right? Like, what do you mean catching up with AI? I remember, if you haven't watched the interview with Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, they have two of them. The most recent one, he goes into it in quite a bit of detail. But the thing that kind of scares Joe is this thing where Elon is talking about sort of like the transfer of data, the transfer of thoughts without actual verbal communication. Like it's like
verbal or auditory or whatever else, right?
Like we look at each other and we communicate just like that. And yeah, I mean, for Elon it sounds cool. For Joe it's like, ooh, like this sounds crazy. And honestly, it does a bit. Like I'm not so sure I feel comfortable with that. Like when I listen to this interview, I'm like, man, I don't know if I would like that. And it's like, okay, put the pros and cons behind. It's like there's something beautiful about speech.
Sure, that's very interesting. Yeah, good point.
There's something really unique, very beautiful about speech. Like when you watch these YouTube videos and you hear this guy just owning that other person in a debate or an argument, it's like, man, this is awesome. You can you replicate that with this telepathy or whatever it is? It's like, I don't know.
Well, so.
And that's not my concern. I'm just saying.
I understand. No. Like, there's something you said for it, right? It's, I mean, kind of analogous, but to a more extreme version of the move from physical books to digital books. And there's just something kind of nostalgic about physical books, right? Sitting there and actually reading something that, it's got that smell, it has this feel, etc. And then you get this Kindle, and I mean, Kindle's great, but it doesn't quite have that same thing. And so to an order of magnitude greater degree, like you're saying, spoken word is, I mean, look, it's so significant that in the Bible, the whole concept is, the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, or whatever, right? Like this concept of word is so powerful, so profound, and that I think tells you something. It's like it is what has brought people together. You just think about without language, how do we communicate? How do we connect? How do we do anything? It's a very intricate part of our social structure.
Also, I think it really helps with the thought process. I don't know, like for example, we were talking about being accountable for oneself, and so remind me, do you actually write this stuff down? You said
which stuff?
Your responsibilities.
What he's referring to, yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, so what I'm trying to get to is. Like when you're writing something down, like a responsibility, when you are putting out a thought in writing, it stays in your memory like kind of differently, the way that you articulate it on paper. Like, would you be able to replicate that with just, without paper? Like with, I don't know.
So this is an interesting thing, right?
Like saving it in a flash? Like, what is it? Yeah,
so I mean, I think there's maybe two separate things that we can look at. The one is what Elon talks about, which is he's like, okay, great. What is it? You've got basically two parts of your brain, more or less kind of like the animalistic lizard brain part, which is very much about emotions, etc. And then there is like the prefrontal cortex, and basically your thinking, reasoning, etc. part of your brain.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you're two people, and they function together.
Yeah.
And each of these gives a certain value, a certain benefit to the person.
Yes.
And he's saying, hey, listen, you're already a cyborg in the sense that you're carrying around this phone.
Right.
And that's kind of like an extension of your brain, right? You're able to search on Google, and you're able to access this broader information. And so basically it's like connecting that to your brain. And the big key point is that right now you're very limited in the bandwidth of communication from the device to your brain.
Sure.
In particular, going from you back in, because you're restricted to your thumbs, right? You can't
True.
put information out very quickly. We are obviously working on speech, but speech is so-so. And you can't use it in a lot of environments because you don't want to be sitting there in a meeting being like, hey, yes, phone, do this, So there's disadvantages to that. So being able to radically increase the bandwidth that you could put into the device is beneficial, as well as being able to get it much quicker. And obviously, probably the most keen cultural example we have of that is in the Matrix, where it's like they'll just plug you in and like upload a program, and you're like, I know Kung Fu.
There's something to be. Listen, I haven't watched Matrix.
What? Bro.
Listen, I've watched
this
clips.
guy, all you guys put a thing in the comments, tell him, listen, he has to watch the Matrix.
I'll watch it, I promise.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I've watched clips. I've watched the,
Yeah, bullet time.
Yeah.
Whatever thing. Yeah.
The, stopping the bullets right there. I've watched quite a few clips, but I've actually never watched them. Not that I remember off anyway. Like, I don't know if I watched it years and years back. I know it's quite an old movie.
Yeah.
But I have no recollection of the actual movie.
Oh, you got to watch it. It was, the thing about it is, it was so culturally significant and so iconic. Just in terms of like, you watch so many other movies and there's so many references to the Matrix, right?
There
so
are,
it's like
that's true.
You should just like to understand the culture, you should experience that movie. And,
I will. I will.
Yeah.
Seriously, I will.
Definitely. I rewatched it
I
not long ago. It was yeah. Actually, I think I rewatched all three of them. So
and there's three of them.
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I didn't even know.
The third one is notoriously bad. But I didn't find it was as bad this time. I think I'd only seen it back when it came out in the theaters. So
Yeah, usually when they stretch out the story, it degrades.
Yeah.
It's quite unfortunate. Anyways.
Yeah. All good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the whole point is, if you had the ability to like learn something like that, I mean, amazing, right? Just if you think about, we had an earlier episode where we were talking about the education system, right? Well, imagine if you don't need to go through this lengthy education
What
process.
does that mean for the capitalist system? Like, if I don't have a skill over you and we have the same skill instantly, what does that mean for the capitalist society?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to do an episode in the future on AI, and we'll discuss that and how things play into it. But of course, it's not intrinsic that it's just your skills, right? Like, if we just think about this, theoretically, all creatures have the same biology, but how they adapt is dependent on their environment, right? So you kind of molding and shaping what it is that you're given, even if you and I are given more or less the same thing, I can mold and shape mine in this trajectory, and I can choose to go to this place, etc., and you can not. And as a result, that can benefit me or you the other way around. So I don't think that there's intrinsically, I think that it's probably some degree of a leveler, and I think probably in a positive way, although probably initially the opposite, right? Initially, if we talked about wealth and income inequality.
Yeah,
in the previous one.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, imagine the first people who have that compared to those who don't.
Right.
An enormous advantage.
For sure.
Orders of magnitude advantage.
But in today's society, right,
Yeah.
the people that are in the top and the people that are in the bottom, isn't there usually quite a large, and not always, I can think of examples where probably that's not always true, but in a lot of cases, isn't it that the people in the top have a lot more skills or are way more good in one thing than the people in the bottom in a similar professional, let's say?
I mean, we obviously did the episode on success previously. So, we talked about this, and I do think it is an interesting topic because, of course, is Mark Zuckerberg dramatically more skillful than one of the engineers who works at Facebook?
Yeah.
I don't know that that's true.
I would think so. I mean,
Mark Zuckerberg.
We don't know if he's kept up with it like he was when he was younger, because he has to take care of so many things that are completely executive at this point, right?
It's not even that. Because of course you can narrow down on any specific skill set, and there's like a million of them, right? You could be like, oh, this person's better at JavaScript, and this person's better at C++,
yeah.
right? This person's better at baseball, and this guy's better at basketball. I'm not thinking about it like that. I'm thinking more about the fact that ownership of assets plays such an important part in your ability to succeed, right? If I have capital and you don't have capital, then all things being equal, I'm going to destroy you.
Yep.
That's just the way that it goes. If I have infrastructure, if I have a team, if I have a brand, if I have recognition in the marketplace, it's like, is Donald Trump the most skillful at something? Well, it doesn't. If you're comparing him to somebody else who might be way better at PR or marketing or whatever, he has a following of however many tens of millions of people, and so at the press of a button, he can reach tens of millions of people. This is an enormous advantage. Yeah, true. But I mean, that's true of anything, right? Like you have this compounding effect.
Yeah.
And
it makes sense. Makes sense.
So, I think that the argument for meritocracy. There's actually a guy who wrote a book that's kind of like against meritocracy. I think that Sam Harris interviewed him.
Hold on. Explain what meritocracy is.
Meritocracy is the idea that people who have merit, who basically you succeed and you rise based on your merits of your actions, your skills, etc. And I think that, the ideal of something like the capitalist system has a lot to do with this idea. There's an intermingling with meritocracy, right? This idea that you should earn it rather than steal it kind of thing.
The moment you say meritocracy, the series 3% comes to my mind. I don't know if you know about it.
No.
Yeah, it's like there's this island that is the heaven, paradise, right? With high tech and this and that. It's like, oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And there's the slums.
Yeah.
And the people that, are piss poor, like the complete opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And when you become 18, you go through a process so that you have merit.
Interesting.
With a group.
Yeah.
With a group of people.
Yeah.
Like you compete with other people too.
Yeah.
So, and only 3% of those people, and it's like a large amount of people every year, goes through the process and eventually goes through. And when they go through, they go to that place.
Yeah.
And that is pure meritocracy. When you said that word, I was like, oh man, yeah. I actually quite enjoy that the series.
Super cool. Yeah, so I'm somebody who intrinsically finds appeal in the concept of meritocracy, but there is a bunch of reasons to believe that meritocracy is kind of a fantasy, that it's not so real to reality, and in part because a lot of fields simply are not very meritocratic for a whole bunch of reasons. But even in the ones that tend to be more based on that, sports being probably one of the best examples, right? The reality is that if you can play baseball really, really well, or basketball or whatever, then you pretty much can go, to the heights. Even in that space, which is, driven by a greater extent by deliberate practice and things like this.
Yeah.
The coaching that you got when you were young, what age you were when you were drafted, who else you were around, etc. All these factors, which are pure luck-based, play a pretty profound role in where you end up, in your merit, right? So, you can get into that. And maybe we'll see if we can interview that guy, because it would be super interesting to find out his comments on, why meritocracy doesn't exist, and on and on and on. So,
Sure.
But rolling back a little bit to this subject, so we talked a bit about, the one side of things with, okay, you're basically a cyborg, right? With Neuralink, you've got the external, the addition to your brain, the third layer, as Elon Musk.
Why don't we talk about what happens when it's actually out there, the first people that get access to it, what kind of advantages they have? And would it be, I think one of the first people to get access to it would probably be Elon and somebody in his inner circle. I don't know. I'm just saying. Probably the already has it. Who knows?
No, the guy's already a robot, or he's an alien or something. So it's.
But I don't know. I mean, Are we probably overestimating also what it can do? Like,
So in my opinion, what I would say is it's not so much about are you overestimating it. It's about you're overestimating the steepness of the curve. What do I mean by this? What I mean is it's not like, hey, the first Neuralink is going to come out and give you superpowers.
yeah.
The first Neuralink is going to be very, very minor. In fact, they did the demonstration recently where they demonstrated it on the pigs.
It was pigs, yes.
And I mean, basically all it could do was read the signals in their brain while they were walking
Yeah.
and accurately predict that these certain neurons would fire in accordance with the pig walking.
What was it he said? You see, it's alive. What do you say? It's like, you want to say a good thing about it? Pig is alive. It's okay. Right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that what he said?
Yeah, something like that. Because the idea is they'd, put the chip into these pigs, and the pigs were fine. They'd successfully removed the chips from the pigs, and the pigs were fine. And
Right. So that's another thing for the listeners out there that are new to Neuralink.
Yeah.
They're thinking, okay, well, you put this chip in your brain. Can you remove it? According to Elon, you can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm quite curious to see what will the progression of Neuralink will be. Will it be? Will you literally take out this much skull and just like because right now they're just talking about a tiny bit of thing.
Yeah. It's
Will
like
it-
the size of a quarter or something like that, or silver dollar or
Yeah.
whatever.
Will it be eventually something to where you just add on more and more and more and more?
Well, I think
Like sew them off like military badges of.
you're like Darth Vader and.
So what are you going to say?
Well, in one of our previous episodes, I mentioned that from my standpoint, one of the things that will change the most that people are not talking about in the next 100 years is the nature of what it means to be human will change.
True. Yeah.
Because the combination of genetic engineering, or biological engineering, and cybernetics, right? These two forces will mean, and so, you get into this question of like, okay, if most of you is not biological matter anymore, or you've replaced that biological matter with matter that we've grown in a lab or something like that, are you still you? What makes you you?
What was it that you were telling me? I think it was about a dog and a tail, or was it something else? And like, it had to do with this. Like, to what percentage does the dog control the tail, and to
What extent does the tail control the dog?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
there wasn't it you?
I don't think so.
Oh man, I don't know. There was something like this that I either read it somewhere or you told me about it on one of our conversations. And if I can't remember precisely what it is, it's probably not worth talking about it. But it's like, to what percentage will you control the the chip, and what
Exactly.
it does to you, and
100%.
to what percentage does it control you? So
Yeah.
it goes back to what you just said right now. It's like, well, are you going to be the more biological you, or are you going to be more of the...
Who is you?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's a pretty, I don't know, kind of like existential question, right? Just like, what makes me me, And yeah, it's a very interesting, and obviously raises tons of bioethics questions, and there's a whole flurry of things out there. The thing that I was going to mention is, and kind of tying into this, is like the one part that we've talked about is, okay, hey, you can access the power of the computer. The other is, well, the computer can make changes inside your brain, right? So basically by firing, which is kind of the early, I think, when we look at the sequence of things in Neuralink, the progression of the technology, what do we have? Number one is really based on this idea that we're going to learn more about the brain, right? We can say, okay, great, this is going to give us some deeper understanding to help explore and just unlock the secrets of the brain. Amazing, fantastic. I think that's almost entirely positive, right? The second is we say, okay, we learn to manipulate in order to do things like repairing problems, right? Because somebody can have brain damage. Now we can say, okay, great, maybe the neurons aren't firing. We can do that manually. We can, rewire the circuitry of the brain, whatever.
That's crazy talk. That's crazy talk.
But imagine, like, if you're somebody who is in a situation that they have, lost some ability, right? Like you were talking about, they become paralyzed. I had my dad's cousin, maybe like a year ago, had quite a horrible accident
man.
got paralyzed from the neck down.
Ah, it's terrible.
Yeah, and
terrible.
ended up opting to have like doctor-assisted suicide because it was, just torturous for him, right?
Did he do it?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
That's very sad, man.
And imagine if you could fix that, right? Imagine if spinal injuries, if brain injuries were not permanent, were not irreparable. I mean, that'd be fantastic, right? Somebody who I used to babysit growing up, his son or daughter, I think son, 2 years old, they just discovered has brain cancer, and they have to take him for an operation, and they said they'll probably lose the one eye, and they're hoping they won't lose both eyes. Like, imagine you're talking about a 2-year-old, right? So imagine if you can, repair that, if you can prevent against that, if you can do something with that. I mean, that's just a phenomenal degree of very, very positive change that you can bring to somebody's life, and by consequence, their family, their friend. There's a lot of people who are caught in the halo of it,
Absolutely.
right? So, very, very good thing that you could do there. As you go beyond that, you start to say, okay, let's get much more extreme. Like, hey, can we download our memories? Can we download our dreams? Can we read our thoughts? Can we have telepathy? Well, now when you start doing this, this opens a world of weirdness that is potentially really frightening, right? But also the thing that I think is interesting, because you were mentioning about speech, well, how much is speech really necessarily auditory versus how much could you just make it so you hear the speech in your head and you give the speech through your head into somebody else's head?
I guess the potential here is just unlimited, right?
Because in theory, what happens, right? Your vocal cords get stimulated and, create various sounds. It gets shaped by your mouth, etc. Off you go, the air goes across, blah, 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 blah. Then it comes in at the other end. It gets, there's basically just vibrations in your ears, and this is going to send signals to your brain through neurons, etc. And, your brain is somehow going to construct and interpret what that means. Well, in theory, you could just bypass all of that and just stimulate the neurons directly, nothing to do with the ears. And it's as though you heard something, even though there was no sound.
That's insane.
Which is a wild thought, right?
Yeah. Wait, do dolphins or whales have some kind of communication like this, or no?
I think they do more like a sonar type thing.
Anyways.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's insane. Yeah, but there are all these fears, right? Like just how there are hackers today, and they do all kinds of things with computers and the internet and malware and spyware and you name it. It's like, how will they exploit this, and what are the consequences? Because there are consequences when you get your computer hacked, depending on what you have there. But getting your thoughts hacked, your memories, it's
that's deeply concerning, actually.
And besides that, can they send certain commands to your brain now that they have access to it? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Can they stop your heart? Do this, do that, right?
In theory,
I don't know.
Yeah. In theory, they could, right? Because, I guess some of it is automatic, so it doesn't require, your heart beating actually doesn't require your brain, which is kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
But, hypothetically, a lot of different weird stuff could happen. So I think that it's easy to understand the dystopian side of this, right?
It's like if they can control your brain, can they make you move around?
Sure, in theory they could, right?
That's mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, they could make you think. They wouldn't. There's different layers of this. You could say, okay, can they make you move? Okay, in theory they could make you move potentially against your will.
Yeah.
But instead of doing that, they could make you think so that you would want to move. Mm. They could make you feel something so that you're uncomfortable, even though you're not uncomfortable, which would cause you to shift. You just start going down. It's almost like you become a puppet on a string, right? And it's like somebody's sitting there pulling these little cords.
Could it be that alien? Okay, I know we're getting too deep into all this stuff, but right now we're just exploring something that we have no idea where it can go in 20, 30 years. But I just wonder. Okay, this is the first step for us, right? Where we have.
In the meantime, click subscribe.
Click the subscribe button, click the like button, and comment below what your thoughts are.
Perfect. Okay.
Please.
All right.
All right.
Get into it.
could it be that the alien civilizations that could be around are so advanced that they actually don't need a chip on our brains so they can, do things like this?
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
I don't know. I'm just okay. I know
We should do an episode at some point on aliens. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, I hope the audience is okay with it. Well, yeah. I mean, some of the conspiracies sometime are worth exploring, just so you can see if there's something there. But yeah, this is totally.
Yeah, I don't think it as like I don't think of it from the standpoint of conspiracies or anything. I think of it as rethinking how life could be. Because I think one of the things that's a gap, and we're a little bit off track here, but in the way that people conceptualize aliens is they assume that aliens are quite like humans. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that aliens would be nothing like humans. Even if we just think about this extrapolation of our own timeline, right? And we say, okay, look, we know that sometime over the next 100-ish years, we are going to start to play with, like I said, what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Cybernetics and genetic modification and things like this. So we're not that far into our history of as a civilization, 10,000-ish years, right? So if you assume, hey, listen, let's extrapolate that forward 25 million years, right? Well, on a 25 million year timeline, how much would we have changed ourselves? Like dramatically different, right? And so at that point, you say, well, hang on, if you continued to amass tremendous understanding about the nature of the universe and science and physics and so on and so forth, and you learned to manipulate those forces, like, would you continue to make your species the way that your species is? I think probably not. I mean, you're hyper vulnerable, right? You're very, it just makes sense that you would change that. You'd say, let's engineer ourselves totally differently. And so, we look at it as like, oh, they're going to have a spaceship and they're going to be some, organic matter. I think that's probably really dumb. Like, why would you do that? You would just be so much more advanced. You wouldn't think in those terms. You would probably have you would almost certainly have some sort of electrical, computerized cybernetic type existence that had some sort of collectiveness to its thinking pattern, right? Like we'd be able to communicate between each other.
And he says all that because it's really worth making an episode on this stuff, right? Because there's a whole microcosm of...
Yeah, you can go very deep down that thing, which is great for, thinking about sci-fi ideas.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. I really don't want to go way off track, and actually I almost did again further off track. So let's go back to.
So I think to me one of the things that is worth exploring here is we've discussed just the surface of, and I think your mind can just start racing around the dystopian possibilities of something like Neuralink. Mm-hmm. So in the event given that is the case, you can be like, okay, well, it's going to have some payoffs. It can help people who are, disabled, etc. I mean, that's not, if I look at these in a risk-reward equation, mm-hmm. I'm like, risk seems really, really high.
Yes.
Reward, kind of marginal. Like, how many people are actually like, okay, I gave, this really horrific case of, this 2-year-old kid or whatever. It's like, but how often does that happen? It's such a small percentage of people who are affected by that it seems like, I don't know, this is kind of imbalanced, right?
Yeah.
So in that environment, does it make sense to, or why does it make sense to build something like Neuralink?
No, I mean, that's certainly a good point. I don't know, do you think Elon has thought about this?
Of course he has. Yeah, I think that Elon started Neuralink because he believes, and I think there's a strong reason to believe that he's right about this, that our future is already in dire jeopardy due to artificial intelligence. And that the most probable way that we could go along with the journey of artificial intelligence is by merging ourselves with computers.
Yeah.
That essentially computers will very quickly far outstrip our capacity in almost every way. Mm-hmm. We can,
loss of jobs, like whatever. For example, cashiers are going to go away. The, trucks are going to drive themselves. Like you name it. Like a bunch of industries are just going to disappear.
Virtually everything. Like, if you just consider, okay, look, if it takes me 20 years to train somebody, that's a really expensive process. Versus if I can train the computer once, I can replicate it 1,000,000 times like that. The marginal cost of replication of that knowledge for a computer is nothing. Whereas the cost of replicating it into another human is potentially millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's not a good equation. So intrinsically, you're going to rapidly start moving in that direction. We're already seeing this, right? Like fraud prevention algorithms are far, far better than humans are. Like there's just many, many cases. We can have computers that can compose music. We can have computers that just destroy, like even you look at the rate of change in like game software, right? It's like, okay, you had Deep Blue back in whatever it was, 1997 or something like that, whatever it was that beat Garry Kasparov for the first time. You know, over the last number of years, chess computers destroy humans. It's not even like worth thinking about anymore. But Go was really hard to beat, right? Then they came out with Alphago, and Alphago beat all the top Go players easily, right? The game that they said is far too complex for a computer. It's like hundreds of orders of magnitude.
Alphago is a program?
Yeah, it's an artificial intelligence algorithm designed to play Go, right? Then AlphaZero came out like a year later or something and destroyed AlphaGo, right? So to the point where these games, like, there's no, it's beyond anything that you could just imagine in terms of your ability to compete with this thing. It's just, like, it's impossible, right? And that's a very short period of time that you're talking about that development. And we're talking about, you know...
There's only so many variables there in chess. If it's already played every single variable in, you know, as, you know, black or white, doesn't matter. Like if it's played every variable, every single move that you can make in every single variable way, like it basically knows what to do. So yeah. I think that's, isn't that why?
No, that's not why. So that was a more historic way. They don't need to do that anymore because basically they'll just have the computer play against itself and develop its own form of like heuristics. You know, basically it trains a neural net and uses that neural net to decide how to make decisions in given positions. The game is still sufficiently complex that it basically can't process out every move going forward.
Okay.
So it's not quite so straightforward as being, I mean, maybe if you could let it run for, you know, whatever period of time, but we're talking about like tremendous permutations of the game. Like basically every move increases the number of permutations by a factor of somewhere between 8 and 20, right? So, you know, imagine you're 40 moves in, you know, talking about, you know, 40 or 20 to the power of 40 possible variations that game could have had, which is insane, right? So you can't do it all the way out. It doesn't matter. Chess computers would do that where they would do a few moves ahead, and that's why they're tactically perfect. But being able to develop strategies, they can now do strategy that is far superior to human strategy, and that's pretty cool. But so the whole point is just, okay, computers will increasingly be able to do these things better than us. And it has a compounding effect on itself, because not only we reach a limit of our knowledge, like we die, and that information has to get passed on. The computer doesn't die, it just continues to improve itself, right? And continues to amass more and more data, and the more it learns, the more it can learn how to improve how it learns in this, you know, ever-increasing spiral. That's kind of the risk, right? And what does this do? Well, first of all, it's potentially an existential threat for it, where the computer could inadvertently or directly just wipe us out. Right? That's a pretty dangerous thing, which is why OpenAI exists. Elon also started OpenAI to try and kind of address that issue.
Go a little more into that, I think, just because we might have a lot of listeners that have no clue what you're just talking about.
Okay, so OpenAI is a startup by Elon Musk, and you know, so basically his argument is that the development of AI, how it happens, it's really, really important that it is done in a safe way, because the repercussions of doing it wrong are catastrophic, right? And so he started that organization in order to further the development in a way that is kind of responsible, et cetera. As opposed to, you know, you could maybe be critical about Google DeepMind, which is, you know, more secretive, more kind of on their own, et cetera. And I mean, I think everybody in the space has some awareness of the potential concerns. but there's pretty divergent differences in, you've got kind of like Larry Page of Alphabet, who's like, thinks AI equals utopia, and then there's Elon, who's like AI equals dystopia, right?
Yeah.
And
Kind of funny though. Elon is the one that's actually working on bringing a lot of this technology to, to the flesh, but he's not entirely optimistic about it.
No. He's super concerned about it. But the problem is, what do you do about that, right? Like he's like, hey, we should regulate it. Regulation mechanisms typically come too late, et cetera, and so we should be proactive about it. I think the problem is, if you regulate it and China does not, China's going to beat you. I think the only solution to the AI problem, and again, we'll do an episode on AI, the only solution to the AI problem, aside from something like Neuralink, is to try and be faster than everybody else at it and do it in a way that is careful and controlled. And these two objectives of being fast and being careful almost intrinsically combat with each other, right? Like the faster you go, the more likely you are to make a mistake and just have an unforeseen consequence. So yeah, there's lots to be said for this thing being like, it's a bit concerning. So in the absence of that, if you're like, okay, well, ultimately computers are going to be smarter than us, computers are going to be able to do pretty much everything better than us, et cetera. What is the solution? The solution is to say, well, if we merge ourselves with computers, then we and the computer will function symbiotically, and we'll get to go along for the ride. And who knows? I mean, it's obviously pure speculation what this AI looks like.
That's
and
the intention.
Yeah, and it's also pure. Like one of the things that I think is bullish about Neuralink is the truth is that we don't actually know how hard it is to develop artificial general intelligence. So as powerful as AI is, and far more capable than humans in many, many regards, it is much weaker than human intelligence. And we don't really have theories and models yet of figuring out how to make the computer solve those problems. So we don't know how challenging it is, right? Like some people say, okay, the projection is we're going to reach artificial general intelligence by 2050, artificial superintelligence somewhere, not too long after that. Artificial general intelligence, just to clarify here, so what we have now is what they would call artificial narrow intelligence, meaning that the narrow intelligence is designed to do something, right? A fairly limited spectrum of things. So it's like, okay, that algorithm is really good at spotting fraud, but it can't play the piano, right? This other one plays the piano, but it can't spot fraud, that kind of thing. And general intelligence is the idea that it can move from one to the other, and kind of operate like a human can in that regard, right? We can pick up all these different skills in all these different areas. And so if it could think like a human, and it could, you could have some sort of a singularity event and things like this, okay, that would be very significant. We don't know how hard that is, right? It could be that problem is orders of magnitude more complex than we believe. In fact, if I was to guess myself, I would err that that's probably the case. I think the problem is likely much more difficult to solve than we are giving credit for. Much like how we've struggled with fusion power for decades and decades. But you can't really risk it, right? Because the consequence is pretty catastrophic. The interesting thing with Neuralink is even if it turns out that problem is really hard, and even if it turns out that the AI thing, isn't a serious issue, there are a lot of side benefits pretty early on to Neuralink in terms of understanding the brain, in terms of addressing these, neurological problems, et cetera, et cetera. So
I wonder if you can attach and detach it and be able to tell the difference.
That'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's like a way even you could just flick a switch and turn it off. I mean, in theory you could, right?
This is really strange shit that we're talking about. And the fact that this is all within the decade ahead is just, man, like what has this world come to?
I mean,
we went from having the internet to having Neuralink. It's like,
yeah. I mean, I think that Neuralink.
What happened here?
Like to me, I would for sure invest in Neuralink if there was like an opportunity, et cetera. I would definitely put money into Neuralink, no question.
Like an investor, like buying stock or
yeah,
what?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Putting capital in to help develop it. I think that Neuralink is brilliant. In my opinion, it is the most significant, most important company of the next 50 years, probably.
I think more.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, hard to say, but very, very important, very, very significant, and a really good initiative. I think that it's funny. Somebody who works for me, her boyfriend or fiance, now he works in brain research, and they're developing gizmos to read brain waves and things like this. But they don't actually go into your brain. And so I've had some conversations.
Won't it completely destroy the pharmaceutical industry?
Why would it destroy the pharmaceutical industry?
Look, okay, for example, how is cancer formed in our body? Isn't it an overreaction of our own body on, you know where I'm going with this?
I mean,
what if you can regulate that reaction? Like, could you prevent cancer? Could you, like, I don't know, like, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I understand.
Could there be certain things that this can help with that are far beyond just helping with limbs and things like this, where it will destroy the pharmaceutical industry, it will really hurt them? And will that give them incentive to try to, not let this through?
I think there's going to be a lot of incentive to try and not let this through. Like, let's be clear there. I don't think it would wipe out the pharmaceutical industry because, is it going to offer birth control? Probably not. Although maybe it's going to help people with their pull-out game. I don't know. It's like, hey, pull out now, pull out. Okay,
Yes. Yeah, well, that'd be.
So, like, there's a lot of applications, I think, to the pharmaceutical industry that are not going to go anywhere. But you think about something like pain management, right? In theory, okay, I mean, you have this nerve cell which is stimulated, which is sending a signal to your brain. You're registering pain. In theory, you could just be like, okay, we're just going to turn that off. We're going to redirect that. We're going to affect it somehow. So yeah, probably a lot of applications of the mainstream medical industry as it is today. Like, this will be a medical device for sure, right? I mean, it is a medical device. It's going in your body. It's affecting, etc. So, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, right? It probably will.
Like, you're able to tell, do I have COVID, right? Like,
I don't know that it would be able to do that, to be honest with you.
Who knows? Who fucking knows, man?
Yeah.
It's like this is the very first version, and it already has so much potential. Like, how will it evolve? Like, neither of us know.
That's true. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing, is that probably the evolution of Neuralink is, hey, listen, rather than having these wires just in your brain, you have these wires in a whole bunch of parts of your body. Your heart, your lungs, your liver, your gut, like, gut health is a really big thing. So when you bring up the point about the pharmaceutical industry, like, the pharmaceutical industry will get disrupted a lot over the next 20 years or something, because we're learning so much about, things like gut health, like brain function. Interesting, we just finished the U.S. presidential election, and one of the things that they were...
It's not finished yet, but okay.
I mean, the relevant point here is that they voted to go ahead with magic mushrooms as being legalized. And so now...
Where?
I think it was Colorado and possibly Oregon, something like that. I don't remember the details, but a couple places have allowed this now.
Okay.
And so one of the kind of like next waves of investment is, unfortunately, I'm not on top of my neurochemistry, so I don't remember the names, but a bunch of these chemicals are like super effective. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a psychologist and has worked a lot in the area of dealing with people who are drug addicts and drugs, etc. And he was like, oh yeah, like, this is far more effective than most conventional pharmaceuticals for treating various things like PTSD. And so we're going to see a lot of change in that space over the next however many years, for sure. And this will probably be one of them.
I wonder if it's going to be affordable for the average person to be able to, get it. Like, what is the cost for something like this?
I mean, right now it's going to be super high, in part because this robot is like $20 million, right, to install this thing in your head. So the cost of an operation has to be, a proportion of that, right? The device itself is probably quite inexpensive. Maybe $1,000, I think, is kind of like the target or whatever. So you're basically saying the cost of an iPhone in your head.
Would you do it?
Yeah, for sure. When it gets to a certain point of maturity.
What is a certain point of maturity?
I mean, first of all, I would want to see that it was going to offer me some sort of meaningful benefit, right? I don't want to do it just for the sake of putting a bunch of wires in my head. That seems really lame. I would want to have seen that they had done a lot of them safely. That would be important. And I would want to see that at that stage there was, like, I would be getting something out of it, right? Is there some sort of either, you know.
So you're not going to be one of those first guys that if he gets it and it works, you're going to just take it and take advantage of it and, you know,
I don't,
get ahead.
So that's my point. Is I don't think that it's going to evolve like that. I think that's
Okay.
a poor understanding of what will happen. So to me, it's not like being the first man to land on the moon, right? Like there, you're like, it's very binary. You're not on the moon, you're on the moon. Here, it's much more of a gradient. You're like, okay, we can read what your neurons are doing in these certain parts of your brain. I think right now they have like 1,000 wires or something. So there's like however many 1,000 different, you know, points where they can detect information. Maybe they'll increase that by a factor of 10 or something, right? So you have 10,000 of these things in there. So okay, great. You know, I can detect that. That in itself is not that useful, right? Yeah. It's very valuable from a research standpoint, but beyond that, whatever. Then it's like, okay, we can start doing something with it. We can say, okay, maybe we can optimize where you were weak in some way. You know, it would have to get to some point where there was a benefit that I felt like, hey, my life would be better because I had that. And, you know, when that happens, I'd be like, yeah, okay, that's interesting. And I think that it will have gone through a lot of cases because it'll be developed in this, you know, like it'll be somebody with Parkinson's or, you know, somebody who, you know, has had some sort of an injury, who will get it early on, and they'll work out all the kind of like bugs, quote unquote, that come from actually doing the operation to insert it in you.
And if there's like some sort of side effect, and if it takes long-term side effects and stuff like this, right? You just want to wait it out, and I totally get it. I wouldn't be one of the first guys to go on his rocket things that, you know, go from the US all the way to Japan in 20 minutes. I'll wait for, you know, at least a few thousand of these, and we'll talk about it after, but...
Sure.
But by the way, for anybody that's curious, this is coconut water. This is why it's a bit colored. But yeah.
Yeah, just in case anyone was wondering.
Just in case. By the way,
put in the comments what you thought it was before
yet?
you said that.
If you're not subscribed, hit the fucking subscribe button. All right. Let's make sure. We gotta check in, man, because, you know, there is a percentage of the audience that just doesn't click that red button, and it's
they're missing out. They're missing out. Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about, I think, kind of like why Neuralink, to me anyway. Like, do you have other thoughts on this about, like, to me, the existential threat that AI poses makes the pursuit of Neuralink essential?
I agree. I want to check if I can find, I would like to see what other people think about this real quick, just so I can, you know,
sure.
put in some additional thoughts. So, yeah, Elon is up to quite a lot of things, man.
Yeah, he's great.
I mean, he is one of those very few people. I mean, how many entrepreneurs up there pursue so many things that are so groundbreaking? Whether it be Neuralink, whether it be even the Boring Company is quite important, right?
I mean, it's not very boring.
It's not. So, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit
Sure.
about the Boring Company?
So the Boring Company is Elon's attempt to optimize the drilling of tunnels. So if you just kind of think about this, I think the way that he described it is he moved to Los Angeles maybe like 15, 20 years ago, whatever the number was, and traffic was always this huge problem, and 20 years later, nobody seems to be doing anything about this traffic problem. And so the question is, okay, how do you address that problem? And, you know, some people have suggested kind of like flying cars, et cetera, but you say, well, do you really like the idea of having cars whipping around? Like, what if somebody has an accident? You know, it comes down on your head. What if there was a hubcap? It comes flying down.
Right.
Like, you know, this is kind of a terrifying thought. And so you say, all right, what is the solution? Well, the solution is to go down, right? You could have basically, you know, multiple levels of tunnels that people can commute under, and that this could help with some of the congestion issues, et cetera.
And he was, well, to eliminate congestion, not just to help
Sure.
with it. But I think he was saying you can go beneath the surface of the earth at a lot more levels than you can go up, right?
Sure.
Because there's also, this very popular idea of, hey, flying cars. It's like, whoa. There's just tons of consequences there, right? well, think of 9/11 for real, but just, somebody being able to just fly up, do whatever they want. Anyways, so we're back to Neuralink. So
we can do a solutions podcast episode on traffic.
Yeah. So, there's the first thing that comes up here in Google is what are the ethical concerns of the use of Neuralink?
Sure, absolutely.
What do you think about this?
Do you want to go through what they are, or do we want to say obviously there's massive ethical concerns about it.
For example, me being able to read your thoughts.
Yeah, crazy, insane idea. So privacy, huge issue, right? What happens to my privacy when, your sexual fantasies, your, everything to do with, fantasize about killing somebody. It's kind of like the movie Minority Report, right? Where they would predict, they had the idea of precogs and, arresting people for crimes they hadn't committed yet on the basis of the fact that, hey, well, you were intending to commit it anyway. Right? I mean, you could have something like that. That's terrifying. So that's, I think, a huge concern. Then you have the ability to change people's minds. That's a huge, huge concern. So, right off the bat, those two things I think are deeply disturbing. And then obviously you have the exposure of hackers, right? Somebody can do all kinds of weird stuff that, could have adverse consequences. I think that's potentially terrifying. So what do you think? What else do they mention kind of there in terms of some of these ethical concerns?
No, I'm saying this was the most, it was a popular autofill Google search entry. But I changed it to implications. So I'm just, to be honest, it's not a very popular subject. It's not something that, you see a bunch of people talking about.
I mean, the reality with Neuralink is it's pretty far out.
Elon Musk's Neuralink is an ethics maze, is one headline here.
Sure.
Can Neuralink be hacked? Brain-computer interfaces like Elon Musk's Neuralink could be hacked, letting thieves steal thoughts and memories, experts warn. I don't know who these experts are, because we really don't have many experts, who really understand the brain. But yeah, the potential is that could be possible. Elon Musk plans to link human brains to computers using tiny implants, but a new report warns the implants could leave us vulnerable to hackers. So yeah, I guess that goes back to what we were talking about. And yeah, the other thing is, which I think you touched a bit on, is, the US regulates it, regulates the technology, but China doesn't. So what happens when a Chinese person and an American person meet up?
Yeah.
What additional use can, the Chinese person get over the American? Yeah, man, that's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's...
and when you have dictators, right? And when you have...
Terrifying.
And they can use a version of that to control the population. It's
So I'd like to dive into one really specific issue around this, because I think, there is potentially a really big positive of Neuralink, which is as a coordination mechanism. Okay, so what I would argue is that one of the greatest challenges in our society today is that our coordination mechanisms are breaking down. So to frame this problem, how traditionally, if people are going to work together, right, they need some method of being coordinated. And basically humans are not very effective on their own.
Yeah.
If you put a gorilla and a person against each other, the gorilla wins every time. If you put 10 gorillas, 10 people, the gorillas win. But if you put 100 people, 100 gorillas, the people win because of the fact that they have these coordination mechanisms that gorillas don't have, right? And that as you increase the size, that becomes more and more important.
Yeah.
So the cohesion of society, the proper functioning of society requires some kind of coordinating mechanisms. Now, historically what happened was that you had this coordination maintained primarily through gated broadcast media. Okay? So what do we mean by this? We mean that you had mainly TV, radio, somewhat newspaper, TV and radio primarily, and not just anyone could broadcast on TV and radio, at least not in really large scale. And so there were some gates that prevented extreme bad actors from getting in there, and because it was kind of these centralized broadcast one-to-many spaces, it was more or less easy to regulate them, right? Now, what happened with the internet, and in particular the advent of social media, especially probably over the last 10 or so years, is that anybody, without any restrictions, can have a voice to millions of people, okay?
True.
So now you have millions of people who are all sharing to millions of people. And this is potentially really good from like a disruption standpoint, because certainly it's true that our institutions have failed us in many regards. And there's lots of propaganda that's come out of mainstream media. Governments can't necessarily be trusted, et cetera, et cetera. So this exposes that, and it allows other voices, dissenting voices, to kind of expose those ideas. But at the same time, it also opens up a whole box of misinformation circulating into that space. And arguably, what we're seeing right now in society is the early stages of the effects of that, right? Where you have hyperpolarization, where you have the mainstreaming of conspiracy theories, et cetera, right? A lot of things that potentially are really destructive, that kind of dismantle the function of society. And I mean, if you look at the accelerated growth of China relative to, say, Europe or the US, arguably part of the advantage that China has is the coordination mechanisms they have, right? They can say, hey, listen, we want to build something up really fast. So what can we do? We can just say, okay, we're just going to level this part of the city. We're going to move everybody out. And in 5 years, we build something larger than the financial district of London.
What's 5 years? What about these hospitals now?
Yeah, insane, right?
How long would they take to build them?
3 days or something like that?
3 days to build like tremendous hospitals.
Yeah. So
yeah, no, there's something to be said about that.
Exactly. So there is something like this this decentralized way of operating certainly has various advantages. It's arguably more robust, or certainly more anti-fragile than these centralized systems. The centralized systems are definitely more fragile because if you have the wrong dictator in there, that's really bad, right? We talked about systems of governance previously. But it's not good that nobody can disagree, everybody's at each other's throats, there's like this really big challenge of sense making, right? And so on the one hand, you could say, well, something like Neuralink could solve that, right? Basically, this neural implant that you would have would allow you to reason, in theory, perfectly, right? So a lot of the kind of defective reasoning, cognitive biases that we have could be overridden by something like this, right?
Possibly.
So that's good. At the same time, you have a situation where people could all have access to the same information, and they could absorb it at an incredibly rapid pace, and that would be good. We could also connect with each other potentially in a way that we understand each other better, much more easily. Like, actually understanding other people is a really challenging thing to do today. And the idea that we would train 7 billion people to understand each other and empathize is very, very difficult. There's something called the Dunbar Number, which is, kind of the...
That's so we won't need to speak the same language?
Well, I honestly think that we probably won't need to speak the same language long before Neuralink comes along. Because I think that, like, already Skype and some others have started to do real-time voice translation. And so I'm pretty optimistic.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Voice translation?
Voice translation.
Real time?
Yeah. So, you can speak and, you can read it and put it in the other person's language in real time. And, that's in the early stages, but fast forward 10 years, right? As AI gets better, as neural nets get better, as natural language processing gets better, et cetera, that's going to be a pretty big reality. So I'm fairly optimistic that, within X period of time, you'll be able to go into a foreign country and they'll be able to speak their language, and you'll just have something that, it's like a headphone or something that the microphone picks it up, it translates it, and it speaks it to you in your language. And you would not need to learn another language. I don't know that that's intrinsically a good thing, because I do think that the way we process information, like our thinking, is deeply tied to language. And our understanding of concepts is deeply tied to language. So for instance, it's hard to appreciate differences between things without having distinctions between them in language. So you can say, hey, listen, what's the difference between a duvet and a blanket, right?
A what?
A duvet and a blanket.
What is a duvet?
It's a blanket.
Okay.
No, so like it's a particular type of, so you've got quilts, you've got duvets, you've got, things like this, right? So the whole point is just that, like they'll say, hey, listen, the Inuit in Canada had 23 different words for snow or for ice or something. Why? Well, because they're so used to seeing different types of snow and they're differentiating between, well, this is this type of snow and this is this type of snow. Whereas other people are like, all looks like snow to me, But when you start to point it out, there's a distinction. And that's an important feature of understanding the world and understanding each other. And if you rob somebody of a broader set of language, right? Because certain languages you think about things differently. So there's some people who have argued that this is one of the reasons why the Japanese tended to be really, really good at improving on things, but seem to be less good at innovating, kind of like raw innovation. And
why?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question because first of all, you can ask, is it true? I don't know that it is true.
No, but what is the fundamental assumption there?
The assumption is that the way that Japanese language is structured causes the Japanese to think in a different way than the way that English is structured, which causes people from, say, the West to think in a different way. So here's an example. I'm not an expert on Japanese, but I have a friend who
I love Japanese, by the way.
It's fantastic, fantastic. I love Japan.
Have you been to Japan?
I have. It's one of my favorite countries in the
Oh,
world.
I really want to go.
Oh, it's so good.
I
so
really
good.
want to go.
I've been really craving Japan lately. But anyway, so what they said is for us, this was a friend of mine who's a Japanese teacher, said, if you're speaking in English, you say, if it rains today, I'm going to the mall. If you were to try and say it the way that you would say it in Japanese, it would be more like, I'm going to the mall, so it's going to rain.
What?
Yeah. So there's this completely different structure to how this gets parsed out.
So it's going to rain. It almost sounds like it's a catalyst.
Yeah,
I'm going to the mall, so it's going to rain.
Yeah. And so I don't know the consequences of this, right? It would be super interesting to have somebody like Steven Pinker or Noam Chomsky or whatever to have some conversations with them about language and kind of some of the differentiating factors here. But the point is, I do strongly believe that our language affects how we think. And even it's one of the things I find with girls. Girls use this word so often, cute. Everything's cute. I'm like, babe, that's not cute. It's it might be something else, but it's not cute. So you take this one word and you apply it to 50 things.
Yes.
And it's there's an absence. Honestly, I think this is a problem with racism, by the way, as well, is that we haven't done a very good job of having other words to describe things that are similar to but different from racism. So I'll give you an example of this, is some people will apply the word racism to refer to prejudice and discrimination against people of a particular religion. Well, religion is not race, so therefore saying racism is not really accurate linguistically. Mm-hmm. But the question is, well, what is the word that you use?
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so there's many examples of this where having more nuanced language helps to better dive into what's going on there, right?
I think Greek is pretty nuanced.
I mean, obviously, in some, for instance, Greek, the one that I am familiar with is love, right? There's multiple words for love in Greek, which separate different types of love.
Yes.
And so, whereas in English, we say love, and love has 50,000 meanings,
yes.
It's,
By the way, on the cost of Neuralink, I have here, it says this surgery promised to take less than an hour. Mm-hmm. Is almost completely done by an automated robot, like we said, also designed by Neuralink, at an estimated initial cost of $10 to $20 million.
The robot is. The robot's $10 to $20 million.
Let's see.
The operation is not.
But you see, it's referring to the surgery.
No, that's inaccurate, I think.
Could be. Let me check. But I think it's... The
robot, I think, was... When they did the presentation...
Look, in this context, this surgery promised to take less than an hour. It's almost completely done by an automated robot. So I guess this is attached to the cost of the robot. Is this what you're saying?
That would be what I'm saying, yeah.
Could be. 10 to 20 million bucks.
I think that what Elon said is that the objective is to get it down to $1,000.
for the actual surgery.
Yeah. Or maybe for the actual device or whatever.
Pretty accessible.
Yeah, like, let's say it was $10,000, right? Like if you had a serious neurological condition and you could get it for $10,000, that would be quite reasonable,
Absolutely.
right? I think
Absolutely.
about a good friend of mine
Absolutely.
had an experimental MS treatment with stem cells, and it was very successful. He had very, very good results.
What is MS?
Multiple sclerosis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So horrible degenerative disease. And I remember friends being like, well, how much does it cost? And it cost like around somewhere between 20 and 30 grand. But it was like, who cares?
Right.
You're going to die a horrible death.
Absolutely.
Like, this is a miserable, you're going to have years of suffering resulting in a very horrible death.
Yeah, no.
Like, it doesn't matter what it costs.
It's a pointless question. Like, if I have some disease that's gonna kill me, it doesn't matter if I'm worth $100 million. It's gone. I'm broke next day. If there's a promise that I'm gonna live, I'll earn the money again. It's like the skill is there. But what good is it if you're dead?
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, so in that sense, if it was $10,000, say, and you had some serious neurological condition and this could help you with that, I mean, amazing. That's pretty fantastic.
Absolutely.
So here's an interesting question. What they're learning from these brain scans, just from these MRIs, is that there may be, like when somebody is a psychopath, you could actually see it in their brain. You could tell that they're a psychopath. There's something going on there.
Well, some brainwave?
I don't think it's brainwave so much the structure of the brain.
The structure of the brain is different.
Yeah, and the thing is, we know that we have a certain degree of neuroplasticity, and so we can do things to help to affect and improve that.
What is neuroplasticity?
Basically how the brain can change, right? So the brain is not entirely consistent. It's pretty consistent. It's pretty, pretty rigid, but you can affect the brain. And there's kind of two ways that can go. One, you can have brain damage, of course, which is, bad.
Yeah.
And then the other is that by doing various different, basically brain exercises, that you can help to build neural pathways, you can, expand the formation of myelin, et cetera, in the brain in order to help basically increase your brain function, right? And that there's a bunch of evidence that somebody, say, will have received some sort of head trauma, and that head trauma then prompts behaviors that normally we would associate with, with some sort of psychological condition, but we didn't formally connect it to, hey, there's actually some structural change in the brain that happened that's resulting in that new behavior. And that therefore, it's very promising that if we could see, hey, listen, look what's going on in this person's brain. This person is, possibly going to suffer from some negative conditions, whether this is phobias, whether this is something like, hey, they're psychopathic, whether they have schizophrenia, whether they have multiple personalities, whether they're bipolar, et cetera, that we could observe that somehow. Mm-hmm. And right now, we're like at the very tip of learning about, hey, maybe there's some things we can do to adjust that.
Yeah.
Neuralink potentially goes 2 steps further, giving us much deeper insights into, hey, listen, why is somebody behaving the way they are based on the structure of their brain? And structure is maybe like not the wrong, I'm struggling with the right language here. This is a good example of where, more nuanced language would be better.
And he's a guy that really knows language. If you've
Believe
seen
me.
enough...
Words, I have all the best words. It's like, I like to make, there's a Donald Trump quote where he's like going on and he's like, I'm a very educated man. I went to an Ivy League school. Words, I know words. I have all the best words.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, so I love to like play off that. It's just like, I know words. I have all the best words. So anyway, so the bottom line is that you could observe that. You could identify that. You could that's potentially a really good thing, right? But then your ability to affect how the brain is shaped and evolves within the individual, kind of like adjusts, would be dramatically higher. Right now, it's like, okay, great, you're going to do, kind of something similar to the luminosity, brain exercises, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Maybe it helps to form some neural pathways. Maybe get some neurons firing. I don't know exactly how it works, but something goes on in there. Well, here you could do that at a much more specific level, very precisely and potentially much quicker, which could be super, super useful, right? Now, I don't know how, like if you think about neural pathways forming and then them getting wrapped in myelin, and that kind of increasing the quality of the signal that is sent from one area to another.
Oh man, you're geeking out right now.
Sorry. But the point is that some of that I don't know whether it could work with Neuralink. Like I don't know whether Neuralink could achieve all of that. Maybe you would replace that with a wire, but otherwise you'd need to...
You said sorry 20 seconds ago. Oh, you just can't help yourself.
Well, it's just an interesting thing to consider, right? You're like, okay, like what are the limits of this Neuralink thing, right? Like the truth is, if you talk to a bunch of people who are involved in brain research, they will tell you that they don't think what Elon wants to do is realistic. It's not going to pan out.
They said the same about electric cars, though, to be fair.
To be fair, yeah.
And to be fair, there's always this crazy guy with this crazy idea in the beginning that everybody doubts until, they go out and do it.
Sure.
I would like to pose the question to the audience, and I would like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Would you do Neuralink when it comes out? Would you go and get an implant, or would you wait, and why? I think we would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below, and let us know.
So the question that I wanted to go back to before, that I kind of started on with these coordination mechanisms, right? I was talking about how, hey, listen, we're having the breaking down of coordination mechanisms, and coordination mechanisms are really important to the function of society, right? Yeah. So there is maybe like two loose pathways that you could follow. The one is you could say, all right, over here you have potentially Neuralink can give you kind of like the ultimate dictator's dream, right? You say, hey, listen, we have a central government, and the central government now can control people at a degree which is really, really profound, right?
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw a really great meme earlier. It was like, what is it? Something about like, just putting it out there, but elections with more than one candidate can get messy.
Well, I think for the hell of it, man. No, I think it would be fun for us to put up some of these memes while we're talking about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no, he is part of some meme groups as well, and the fun is endless.
Absolutely.
I don't understand how some people don't like memes, man. They're just...
I know.
They're amazing.
It's
They're amazing. Have you ever created a meme?
No.
Oh, man.
I just share them a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So there's it can be used to be the dictator's dream.
Exactly.
Like Kim Jong-un, for example.
So you could go one way, and you could say, hey, listen, great, you should have this Kim Jong-un type society that is very centralized and has certain merits to it, right? We were talking about the advantages of China, et cetera, but also potentially becomes a very fragile system. It's very centralized, it's very dependent on that locus of control, it potentially stifles innovation, et cetera, right? So a lot of negative things. Over here, you have a decentralized system, right? You can kind of think of blockchain, right? You're like, all right, we have this very decentralized way of approaching things. Do you think that it's important that we get to some sort of a decentralized structure of society or some decentralized infrastructure that this could be applied to in advance before we really go too far with something like Neuralink? Or do you think that, hey, maybe it's better to, allow things open to the Kim Jong-un perspective?
What kind of question is this? Of course, I mean, we don't want things like the Kim Jong-un perspective. You don't want one person controlling the entire thing, right? I mean, you seem kind of awfully thoughtful there, buddy.
I like to challenge the idea, right? I'm interested in saying.
No, I mean, I don't think you want that. You don't want a person to be, and that's the thing. Like, I think it would just be extremely tyrannical, right? Like those people would probably just manipulate your thoughts and control the population to their will and do whatever they want. Like, I think it would go to the extremes. It wouldn't just be like, yeah, you know what, come here, pat my back or something like this. Like, no, it would definitely go to terrible extremes. It's like this is why we call it, tyrannical government. Like dictatorships. Like these people want to retain control. You give them more, sky's the limit.
So let's let's play devil's advocate on that idea. I generally kind of agree with you, but I think that there's a few maybe devil's advocate pieces.
Sure.
The one is, in order to be sufficiently decentralized, in order to resist the Kim Jong-un thing, is it likely that you would degenerate into chaos? And that the chaos would be far worse than this alternative over
Okay,
here.
why would there be chaos?
So if you think about any sort of power structure, the tendency of that power structure is to reinforce and grow its own power base. Okay? So you say, all right, we've got countries. Well, what do countries tend to do? They tend to try and grow, to get more power, to do this. And so if you enter into a Neuralink type environment where everybody has these neural implants, and these neural implants have a deep ability to affect your behavior and your thoughts, as well as read your thoughts, well then certainly any one of those power structures is going to be trying to do this to their people within that little locus of control that they have. And they're going to be trying to expand that locus of control. Okay? Now, so how would you combat that? You would combat that by being almost entirely decentralized, right? By really dividing this out to the point that somehow this mechanism, whatever it is, this broad network, would counteract that effect. But maybe the consequences of that are that you lack the coordination mechanisms at all, and you unleash chaos on the world, and that's potentially very destructive.
Yeah, no, that's totally possible. But then I think it's almost 1,000% sure that if it is centralized and the government does control you, that will almost certainly end in a tragedy. Whereas in the decentralized way, I don't know, man, you're flipping a coin. I mean, it's not a certain death.
So let's flip it around. So hypothetically, you have some big despotic regime.
Despotic?
Despotic, yeah. From the word dictator, a despot is like a dictator. So you've got this despotic regime, right? Okay, you've got, maybe that person's good, maybe that's Lee Kuan Yew, right? Maybe it's Hitler, who knows, right? Over a long enough period of time, you're probably going to get a Hitler in there. Not so good. But
Not so good.
If you have someone who they also have a Neuralink, then theoretically, would the Neuralink influence them, because they'd be connected into this larger population? They would be able to feel and experience what that population is going through in a way that is personalized sufficiently that maybe that would soften them, and they would never be despotic like that.
Oh man, so many theories here. I don't know, buddy. I think the intention rides very, very, very deep in people, like criminals, for example. Do you think if they knew that their victim hurts, they would, not always go and kill?
I don't think it's about whether they know. I think it's
serial
about
killers. I think I should probably change that to a serial killer, because we have to go into the extremes when we talk about
for sure
tyrants. So because a criminal is like, sure, people, they would say, a mistake happened or this and that, but it's like a serial killer. Like this is what they do.
A sociopath or a psychopath or something.
Yeah.
You
like,
don't feel empathy.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if there would be much a difference there.
Okay, but let's give two counter examples to that.
Sure.
Because you're assuming that the world in which this Neuralink would emerge is the same world that we live in.
Yeah.
But the technology that would need to exist for Neuralink to exist would also have advanced. And so, for instance, we could identify with Neuralink who the psychopaths and the sociopaths were, and we could probably treat that sociopathy and
One thing that we could try that would be rather interesting is try to test this out in complete immersive realities. To just see what the reactions are for an extended period of time before actually bringing it on in this reality and
very
regulating it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so immersive reality. You know how we have VR right now, where you put on this freaking thing and you look into either your phone or a device or whatever, right? An immersive reality would be indistinguishable from reality. Like you wear some sort of device, you go to sleep, you wake up in that reality, right? Like test it in that reality and not this reality, and see how it works. I think that's something that would be safer in that sense. And I think if you go as far as doing things like the advanced versions of Neuralink, you should be able to do this thing with the immersive reality.
So that's a really interesting point in general. You and I were talking about that earlier. Is just that probably Neuralink is like the next generation after VR.
Yes.
Right? Because the problem with virtual reality is, okay, great, you can see things in an immersive way, but how are you going to smell things? How are you going to feel them? How are you going to, like, it's not fully immersive. What are you going to, like, put yourself in a bodysuit?
Yeah.
Like, I guess you could, theoretically.
How could you be a woman? And when I say be a woman, it's like full-fledged woman.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Exactly. But, hypothetically, with Neuralink, you could just stimulate those parts of the brain.
Yeah.
So it could feel like somebody touched your hand without actually touching your hand. You know? You could, like, all the sensations that you would normally have could be simulated just within the confines of your brain through particular stimulation, and then you could anticipate that, hey, when I stimulate this, they're probably going to want to move their arm, so we're going to disable their arm at that point in time, and instead the attempt to move their arm is simply going to move their arm in the virtual world rather than in the real world. Like, there's some interesting ideas that could play around with there. So that's for sure a super cool thing. And that, I think, we'll do another video, an episode in the future on climate change, probably a few of them. But one of the things that I think is positive about something like Neuralink and something like VR is the climate change argument. Okay? So if you just think we have a growing population, all the available evidence seems to suggest that the population will grow to at least somewhere between 10 and 12 billion. There's some reason to believe that it will cap out around the year 2100, and that's possible. We'll see. I think there's a lot of unknowns in there, such as our ability to extend people's lives and the effects that will have. But certainly it seems to be that we'll have somewhere around that population.
Yeah.
Barring, something catastrophic. At the same time, people will generally be consuming more. Okay? Even if you were to say, hey, listen, let's bring the standard of living of everyone on the planet up to the same level as people in, the United States, for instance. You're talking about, in most cases, a factor of somewhere between 8 and 4 increase in consumption per person. In some cases, we're talking about, 20 plus times more consumption. So you're talking about increasing the global consumption by a factor of, I don't know, probably something around 8. 4 to 8, somewhere there would be my guess.
While increasing the population by nearly 2.
Well, yeah, I'm saying you're going to double the population, plus you increase the average consumption by a factor of 4, and you get to a factor of 8.
Got it.
So let's just say we're going to consume 10 times more as a species between now and 2100. Or, well, maybe not. We may not have brought that many people out of poverty, et cetera. But that's kind of the trajectory that we're on. This is going to put tremendous stress on ecosystems, right? A really good example of this is fast fashion. So, you can talk about climate change and greenhouse gases and all this. But what about something like just the pollution related to fast fashion? People go to Zara, they go to H&M, they buy a ton of clothes. Those clothes that they buy, what do they do with them? They're often pretty poorly made. They just throw them out. Like, the waste is phenomenal. Really, really large. So how do you address that problem? Well, you could somehow decrease consumption. Decrease in consumption seems fairly difficult in ordinary circumstances. You could have some sort of a recycling process. Okay, possible. It's fairly energy intense, but maybe you could do something like that.
How's all this connected to the Neuralink thing?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
I'm getting to that. Yeah. Maybe you have some other way of expanding our resources base. Right. Those are kind of like the 3 paths that you could have. To me, Neuralink facilitates decreasing consumption very dramatically. And the reason is, hey, listen, if you can if you can give me a virtual experience of going to Maldives, I don't need to burn jet fuel to go to Maldives. If you
true.
can give me a virtual experience of wearing whatever clothes.
If it's so immersive.
Exactly. So now all of a sudden, my consumption per person can decrease dramatically, but my quality of life can go up.
Yeah. Oh man, and how long would some people spend in those realities instead of this one?
All of the time. Yeah. It would be like a drug, right?
Oh man. Yeah, no, that's crazy. That's insane. You know, I somehow, like, I tell Vicky this sometimes, she thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be in the middle of a war. Not in this reality, for sure. Like, to one that I know if I die, it's like, I'll be fine. But, man, the thrill and the craze of being in the middle of something like this. And when I say war, I don't mean with guns, I mean with... more medieval. It's like, oh man, I would love to be part of something like this. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty nuts. I mean, there's lots of things that I would like to do. Some childish, juvenile, like some people would probably think this is kind of juvenile. I bet you too, and a lot of people would love to go destinations and do things. Yeah, I mean, drug would be an understatement. Like, this is... Anyways, my point was that this is a reality that is not this reality. And you can test things out and revert them or completely destroy it if you want to. And if you see that things are catastrophic and they're not working out, get rid of it, right? Like, and try again. So that's my thoughts on it when it comes to suggesting a solution, at least, to this problem. That's
a super interesting idea, to do immersive simulations to try and figure it out. And I think you could probably do like game theory simulations with AI and things like this as well to try and...
What is game theory simulations?
Basically where you would put in the kind of like expected parameters and you would have a computer extrapolate based on those parameters what the outcomes are likely to be.
The way you speak sometimes, some people probably wonder,
You're probably
why
right.
is this man an entrepreneur and not a scientist? I don't know, I'm just saying,
So, so I guess to me, like, maybe summing things up in a bunch of regards, I think that Neuralink is, perhaps maybe the most exciting technology in the next 100 years or something.
I agree.
Like that. Very, very big deal. And I think, we've discussed it could go a bunch of different bad ways, right? You can say, okay, great. Like, the good news is that while we're discussing this today, these problems are probably 10 to 20 years out. Like, I don't think that you're going to see dramatic Neuralink effects for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's very complex engineering. We don't know a lot about the brain. We're going to have a lot to learn, let alone the societal adaptation to being, like, comfortable with putting this. Like, you're going to start with animals. You're going to...
I don't even think it's that. It's like from country to country, it's going to be... Could be countries that ban people with Neuralink. You want to come here? You can't fucking have that.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like you're going to have to comply with different regulations from different countries if you want to have it in the first place. And those things, they take a long fucking time. Right?
Yes.
So when he says 10, 20 years, it's not just the complex engineering, it's also the legal process.
Yeah, the regulatory, the societal,
So, yeah. And I think, like you said, there would be a time frame to where they take the initial part to where they do the beta tests and the bugs and all these types of stuff. Then you take it to the next phase to where you go over a certain amount of years to see if there's any side effects or any problems, and then you build up the consumer confidence to say, okay, maybe I can try it and see what's going on here.
Yeah.
It's just that I think in the beginning, people that have nothing to lose will go for it. Like, for example, this individual you spoke of, like, suicide.
Exactly.
It's like, I have nothing to lose here.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, let's do it.
Yeah, which is going to be super valuable for our learning as a society. Like, we'll learn a lot from those people. In a sense, those people will be heroes.
Absolutely.
For really kind of pioneers for helping us to advance this technology. So the good news is we don't have to worry about that too much. But Obviously, there's a whole bunch of problems that could come out. I think it's really interesting, your idea of kind of how we can run simulations, et cetera, to kind of predict the outcomes. On the flip side, I think that there are so many possible benefits to, like, if I was to pitch a utopian vision of Neuralink, I would say, like, what do you see here? You see potentially the ability to understand each other perfectly, right? The degree that we could connect as people.
Less divorces.
Sure. I mean, potentially no divorces at all, right? Certainly, a lot of shared understanding in terms of rapid learning, right? Our ability to just advance as a society, our ability to work together, our ability to understand each other better, our ability to problem solve, et cetera, could go up dramatically, right?
I wonder, do less divorces mean longer? I mean, of course, that directly means longer relationships and, and all of that. Would that mean, faster, rapid growth of population?
Not necessarily.
I mean, you do see today people have kids and they break up. Yeah. But I wonder if they stay together, could they have more and more kids?
I mean,
on average. So could it affect population growth that way?
Certainly it could. Certainly it could.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we should do it. Well, in the future, we'll do an overpopulation thing. We'll do it in population implosion video. We'll do, these will be some future episodes that we can discuss, which will be super interesting. If you guys have stuff you'd like to see, please comment, let us know subjects you think would be really interesting, etc. Click the subscribe button, the notification bell, all this kind of thing.
You know what to do, guys. If you haven't subscribed yet, I don't even know what to say. We're in this nearly a couple hours now, I think.
I don't know. I'm not sure how long we've been going.
Wow. But look, we've told you a couple times, subscribe. We have quite a lot of things that are coming out. We're very excited to share. And we also, there's an idea we're entertaining with, doing those things live as well. Sometimes we're just doing separate ones live where we just communicate with you guys directly and we have a live discourse about, all sorts of topics.
We're also going to probably chop up some of our larger clips into some smaller clips to make it a little bit more accessible for people so they can...
Absolutely.
Take a look.
You can expect lots more content from us. We're working on it. We're still working on bringing on guests. We have approached quite a lot of people at this point in time, and there's a lot of interest. Lots of people making commitments. It's just me and Michael are working on our setups to make sure that they're good, so we can deliver a good experience to you guys, in the meaning of reliable connections, and we want to make sure everything looks good when we're doing a video call with somebody and it goes out to a certain amount of hours. We want to make sure that everything is fine. So even those could go live too, by the way.
Totally, absolutely, yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a very good point.
So
One maybe last thing that just kind of came up when you were mentioning the less divorces and could people end up having more kids, etc. is I wonder what this would do to kind of the concept of childhood and adolescent development. Like, would you develop wisdom dramatically younger? Because basically you'd be plugged into this collective wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Like this kid from Matrix who was doing the spoon?
Yeah, exactly.
See, I know some clips.
You know some stuff, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, like, who knows, right? Like, the evolution of consciousness could be pretty significant. So if I consider the coordination mechanisms, I consider the ability to potentially get past the Dunbar number. For those who don't know, the Dunbar number is basically this idea that you can only kind of like empathize with and have like a real connection with a certain number of people around you. It's typically somewhere around 150 to 200. And so we run into this problem where as we expand and we encounter more and more people, our degree of empathy goes down and our ability to communicate and coordinate with them goes down. And so potentially this could overcome that, right? Yeah. You could say, okay, great, we have no issues there. So that's super cool. Potentially this would advance artificial intelligence in the sense that the artificial intelligence could be learning from our brain, and there could be this symbiosis, so that's great. Like I said, I think there's the possibility that we could dematerialize. I'm really a big believer that in the future, there's right now it's a big talk about climate change, there's big talk about moving to sustainable solutions, etc. I think that over time, dematerialization of a lot of different things is a very real possibility, and a very positive thing, actually. Right now, it sounds horrible because I think, hey, I would just rather go to Maldives than to experience Maldives in a virtualized sense. But
you have no idea how the virtual immersive sense. Yeah, lots of things, man. No, I mean, this is an exciting time to live. There's no doubt about it.
Super exciting.
Yeah. I mean, from the internet to when I was a kid, just opening up Google. I remember my first interaction with Google is when we went to see some of my relatives in Athens.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember what relationship I have with a guy that had a computer. It could be, I think it was either my uncle or I really don't remember. It was such a long time ago. And he opened up Google and he said, listen, anything you type in here, and he showed us how to type, is like, just find the letters here, and you click enter, and it's gonna pop up. And we're like, what? Mickey Mouse. What? It's like, and we would,
amazing,
me,
right?
my sister, and my brother would just sit here and like, what else can you think of? Like, what can we type in here? And it's like going from there to the evolution of the internet and all the things that we have today to all the things that we could have in the future that are so exciting. Yeah, I mean, no doubt we have an exciting future, hopefully.
Have you tried this app? There's like an app you can download for your phone that you just think of a character and it asks you questions, then it tells you the character you're thinking.
Tiana was...
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly, yeah.
I don't know if you remember. And we had
Yeah, I
dinner.
wasn't sure if you had, I couldn't remember if Tiana was the one who showed it to me.
Yes.
But it's just like amazing, right? Like you'll think of like this totally obscure character and it's like, it figures it out. You're like, wow, this is pretty crazy.
Like, for example, you think of Gary Vaynerchuk, Grant Cardone, you think of Tony Robbins, whoever. It just asks you questions and it narrows down the pool of people that you could possibly be talking about until it just suggests the person. Is it Gary? It's like, fuck.
Yeah.
How did you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. Do you know the name of the app? Maybe people can check it out.
I don't, unfortunately.
All right. Oh, whatever.
You can probably Google about the app and then it will tell you what the app is and then you're good because that's the beauty of Google.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Man, I remember being so surprised with YouTube where it's like, I could be like, video where they're playing basketball and the gorilla comes in and it will come up with the video, you know, and you're just like, how does it know? It's so impressive. So yeah, and this is like, imagine you take that technology forward 20 years.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So anyway, I think that's everything for me that I can think of. Do you have anything else to add here?
Likewise, I think that's about it. Guys, we would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know what you think about this. Again, please comment down below. Let us know. Would you put Neuralink in your brain? Would you be one of the first people? Would you wait? And why? Also, along with that, I would like to say again, if you have any suggestions on topics, please let us know. If you're a guest that would like to come on the show, let us know. If you're in Sofia, probably let us know. We're going to talk with you and see if we can take you on the show. But super excited to be doing this. Super excited to be doing a lot more for you guys. So let us know what you think. And hit the subscribe button, like button, and notification bell before we go here.
Perfect. And we will see you guys on the next episode.
See you guys on the next episode.